Good evening and welcome. Tonight we are going to drift slowly and gently through the entire history of Spider-Man on the big screen, from the very beginning right up to the present day. And it is a bigger and stranger story than you might expect, because it is not really one story at all, but several. Over the years, there have been 3 different actors who have worn the mask in live action. 3 quite separate Peter Parkers living in 3 quite separate worlds, and alongside them, a whole other animated universe with a different hero entirely. And tonight, we are going to wander softly through all of it, every major Spider-Man movie universe, one calm piece at a time. It is a perfect thing to catch up on now, with yet another new chapter on the way, and it is an even better thing to fall asleep to, because none of it is heavy, and none of it is urgent, and none of it asks anything of you tonight except that you lie back and let it wash over you. So make yourself comfortable and let the day go, and turn the light down low, and let your body grow heavy and your breathing slow, because for the next while you have nothing at all to do but lie still and listen. We will not be rushing anywhere, and you do not need to remember any of it, or keep the different worlds straight in your head, or follow closely at all. Just let the familiar old story wash over you, the boy and the spider and the great responsibility, told again and again in different shapes, like a favorite tale retold. If a slow, quiet wander through every Spider-Man film ever made is the kind of thing that helps you drift off, you might leave a gentle like before you go, and perhaps tell me down in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight, and then simply let it all go, and let me walk you softly through the whole of it until sleep comes to carry you away. Before we begin with any one particular version, it is worth pausing on the thing that all of them share, the single story that sits at the heart of every Spider-Man ever put on screen, no matter who is wearing the mask. For in every version, the story begins the same way, with an ordinary boy named Peter Parker, a clever, awkward, good-hearted teenager, often bullied, often overlooked, living an unremarkable life in the New York City borough of Queens. And in every version, that ordinary boy is bitten, by chance, by an extraordinary spider, a spider altered by science, and the bite changes him, remaking his body, giving him a set of astonishing abilities that he never asked for and does not, at first, know what to do with. The powers are more or less the same in every telling, and they are wonderful ones. He gains tremendous strength, far beyond any ordinary person, and the ability to cling to walls and ceilings, to climb sheer surfaces as easily as a spider does. He becomes fast and agile, able to leap and flip and move with a grace he never had before. And he develops a strange sixth sense, a tingling warning at the back of his skull that alerts him to danger before it strikes, a kind of early warning system that lets him dodge blows he could not possibly have seen. And to all of this he adds his own cleverness, for Peter Parker is always, in every version, a brilliant young scientist, and he uses that brilliance to become the web slinger, either by inventing mechanical devices that shoot strong strands of webbing, or, in some versions, by producing the webbing from his own body. But the powers are not the heart of the story, and this is the thing that matters most, the thing that makes Spider-Man who he is in every single version. For at the beginning, the newly powered boy is selfish with his gifts, thinking only of himself, of what the powers can get him, and in that selfish moment, he fails to do a small good deed that costs him nothing, letting a criminal go free when he could easily have stopped him. And that same criminal, shortly after, kills the person Peter loves most in all the world, his kind and gentle Uncle Ben, the man who raised him like a father. And so Peter learns, in the cruelest possible way, the lesson that will define the whole of his life, the lesson his uncle tried to teach him, that with great power there must also come great responsibility. That is the true origin of Spider-Man, in every world and every film. Not the spider bite, but the guilt, and the responsibility that grows out of it. Peter blames himself, forever, for his uncle's death, and he vows that he will never again stand by and let harm come to others when he has the power to stop it. And out of that vow the hero is born. He puts on the mask, not for glory, not for money, not for any reward, but out of a deep and permanent sense of responsibility, a determination that no one else will suffer the way he suffered because he did nothing. And so, whoever wears the mask, whatever world he lives in, Spider-Man is always, at his core, the same thing: a good-hearted young person carrying a private grief, trying to make up for a single terrible mistake by helping everyone he possibly can, forever. Let us begin with the first of the 3 live-action worlds, and the one that started it all on the big screen, the trilogy of films made in the early 2000s, with the young actor Tobey Maguire in the title role. These were the films that first proved that a superhero could carry a great, serious blockbuster movie, that opened the door to everything that came after, and there is a warmth and an earnestness to them that many people still hold dearest of all the versions. This Peter Parker is perhaps the most classic of them, a sweet, shy, hopelessly awkward boy, an outsider who longs to be seen, and his story unfolds slowly and tenderly across 3 films. In the first film, we meet Peter as a bright and gentle high school student, living with his Uncle Ben and his Aunt May in a modest house in Queens, hopelessly in love with the girl next door, the red-haired Mary Jane Watson, whom he has adored from afar for his whole life and who barely knows he exists. He is bullied at school, he misses the bus, he is the kind of boy the world overlooks, and his one close friend is Harry Osborn, the son of the wealthy scientist and businessman Norman Osborn. And it is on a school field trip to a laboratory that everything changes, for there, among the exhibits, a single genetically engineered spider, escaped from its case, comes to rest on Peter's hand and bites him, and by the next morning the sickly, awkward boy has been transformed. He wakes to find that he no longer needs his glasses, that his body has become lean and strong, that he can stick to walls and sense danger before it comes, and, in this particular version, that he can shoot strong strands of webbing directly from his own wrists, a gift of the strange transformation. And at first, like every Peter, he thinks only of himself and of Mary Jane, and he decides to use his new powers to win some money in a wrestling contest, hoping to buy a car to impress her. He wins his match, but the crooked promoter cheats him of most of his prize, and so when a robber suddenly bursts in and steals from that very promoter, Peter, still stinging from being cheated, deliberately lets the thief run past him, refusing to lift a finger to stop him. It is the great mistake, the one every Spider-Man makes, and the consequence is swift and terrible, for that same thief, fleeing, carjacks a vehicle outside, and when Peter arrives home, he finds his beloved Uncle Ben lying in the street, shot and dying, killed by the very man Peter could so easily have stopped. Peter chases down the killer in a fury, and only when he corners him does he realize, with a sick horror, that it is the same thief he let go, that his own selfishness has cost his uncle his life. And in that moment the boy is remade, the guilt settling over him like a shadow that will never fully lift. and he remembers his uncle's gentle words, that with great power comes great responsibility, and he resolves to live by them, and Spider-Man is born. Meanwhile, a darkness is growing in the family of his best friend, for Norman Osborn, desperate to save his failing company and its military contracts, tests an experimental performance-enhancing gas on himself, and it makes him stronger, but it also shatters his mind, splitting off a cruel and cackling second personality, dressed in a frightening green and purple armored suit and riding a small jet-powered glider, armed with pumpkin-shaped bombs. Norman becomes the villain the newspapers call the Green Goblin, murderous and mad. Though in his ordinary hours he does not even remember what his other self has done. He is the perfect first enemy for Spider-Man, for he is the father of Peter's closest friend, and his madness draws the two families into tragedy. As Peter grows into his role as Spider-Man, he must contend with a city that does not know whether to love him or fear him, and in particular with the blustering newspaper publisher J. Jonah Jameson, who runs a relentless campaign against Spider-Man in his paper, The Daily Bugle, even as he unknowingly buys his best Spider-Man photographs from Peter himself. And Peter's heart remains with Mary Jane, and slowly, as Spider-Man and as himself, he begins at last to grow closer to her, even as his best friend Harry also falls for her, and even as Harry's father, the Goblin, begins to suspect the truth about the young hero who keeps thwarting him. The conflict comes to its head when the Goblin, having deduced that Peter is Spider-Man, attacks the people Peter loves, striking at Aunt May, and then seizing Mary Jane, and forcing Peter into a terrible choice atop a great bridge, threatening to drop both Mary Jane and a tram full of children so that Peter cannot save them all. But Peter finds a way to save everyone, and the battle carries the two of them to a final confrontation, in which the Goblin, defeated, tries one last treacherous attack, and is killed instead by his own glider, dying as himself, as Norman, begging Peter not to let his son know what he had become. And so Peter keeps the terrible secret, letting Harry believe that Spider-Man murdered his father, planting the seed of a grief and a hatred that will grow across the films to come. The first film ends on a note of quiet, aching sacrifice that would become the signature of this whole version, for at Norman's funeral, Mary Jane finally confesses that she loves Peter, and Peter, more than anything in the world, wants to say it back, but he cannot, for he knows now that everyone he loves is in danger simply by being close to him, that his enemies will always strike at his heart, and so he hides his feelings and tells her only that they can be friends, walking away from the very thing he has always wanted in order to keep her safe. It is a deeply sad and deeply noble choice, and it captures the whole spirit of this Peter Parker, a boy who has learned that being a hero means, again and again, giving up his own happiness for the good of others. The second film in that first trilogy is regarded by many as the finest Spider-Man film ever made, and it deepens everything the first began, for it is a film about the sheer weight and cost of being a hero. Some time has passed, and Peter's double life is quietly falling apart under the strain. He cannot hold down a job, for his duties as Spider-Man make him late and unreliable. He is failing his university classes. He is always short of money, always exhausted, always disappointing the people who count on him. And worst of all, his beloved Mary Jane, tired of waiting for a Peter who never seems able to be there for her, has grown close to another man, an astronaut, and become engaged to be married, while Peter, bound by his secret and his fear, can only watch and ache. The strain grows so great that Peter's powers themselves begin to fail him, flickering and vanishing at the worst moments, his web shooting sputtering out, his strength deserting him, as though his own body were rebelling against the impossible burden he carries. And in the middle of this crisis comes a new threat, born of another good man's ruin. Dr. Otto Octavius is a brilliant and kindly scientist, a man Peter admires, working on a revolutionary experiment in fusion power, using a set of 4 intelligent mechanical arms fused to his spine to handle the dangerous reaction. But the experiment goes catastrophically wrong, killing his beloved wife and destroying the safeguard that kept the mechanical arms under his control, so that the arms, with their own artificial intelligence, take hold of his mind and bend him to their will. He becomes the villain the papers call Dr. Octopus, driven by the whispering arms to rebuild his terrible machine no matter the cost. And he strikes a bargain with Harry Osborn, who now runs his late father's company and who burns with hatred for Spider-Man, believing him his father's killer. Harry, in exchange, gives the Doctor what he needs and demands only that he be brought Spider-Man in return. And so Peter, already crumbling under the weight of his life, finds himself hunted, exhausted, losing everything, and in a moment of despair, he makes a choice that the films had never dared before. He gives it all up, throws his costume in the trash, and decides simply to stop being Spider-Man, to reclaim his own life and his own happiness. For a while, freed of the burden, Peter blossoms, his grades improving, his spirits lifting, but the city suffers without its protector, and Peter cannot escape the truth of who he is. And it is his Aunt May, not knowing his secret, who gives him the words he needs, telling him about the importance of heroes, about how people need someone to believe in, someone who is brave enough to give up their own dreams for the sake of others. And so, when the danger grows too great, Peter takes up the mask once more, and there follows one of the most beloved sequences in all of superhero cinema, a desperate battle atop a runaway train, in which Peter, having lost his mask, strains with every ounce of his strength to stop the hurtling train before it flies off the end of the tracks, finally succeeding but collapsing, spent and unconscious, into the arms of the passengers, who see his unmasked face and, moved, quietly promise to keep his secret. The Doctor captures Peter and delivers him to Harry, who prepares at last to have his revenge on Spider-Man, only to unmask his enemy and discover, to his horror, that it is his own best friend, Peter. Shaken, Harry tells Peter where the Doctor has gone, and Peter races to stop the rebuilt fusion machine before it destroys the city. And in the end, it is not force that wins the day, but Peter's appeal to the good man still buried beneath the villain, for he reaches Otto Octavius, reminds him of who he truly is, of the dreams he once had, and the Doctor, master of himself once more, chooses to sacrifice his own life to destroy his terrible machine and save the city, declaring that he will not die a monster. Mary Jane, present through the ordeal, at last learns Peter's secret and understands everything, and the second film ends with her leaving her wedding, coming to Peter and choosing him at last, telling him that she knows the risks and wants to share his life anyway. The third film in that first trilogy is a larger, busier, more crowded affair, juggling more villains and more threads than the two before it, and it carries Peter to a darker place before bringing him home. As it begins, Peter is happier than he has ever been, together at last with Mary Jane, beloved by the city, perhaps a little too pleased with himself. But trouble gathers from several directions at once. A strange black substance, a living alien ooze that has fallen to Earth, quietly attaches itself to Peter, and it forms a sleek black version of his costume that makes him stronger and more aggressive, feeding on his darker emotions, his pride and his anger and his desire for revenge, slowly changing his personality, making him cruel and vain and cold in ways that begin to hurt the people he loves, especially Mary Jane. At the same time, Peter learns a shattering thing, that the man who truly killed his Uncle Ben all those years ago was not the thief he had always blamed, but another man, an escaped convict named Flint Marko, who through a bizarre laboratory accident has been transformed into a shifting, shapeless being made of sand, able to grow enormous or crumble away to nothing, the villain called the Sandman. And his old friend Harry, still consumed by his belief that Spider-Man killed his father, takes up his father's goblin equipment and attacks Peter as a new masked villain, before an injury robs him of his memory and, for a time, his hatred. And a rival photographer named Eddie Brock enters Peter's life, a dishonest young man whom Peter exposes and humiliates, making an enemy of him. The black substance drives Peter to the edge, until his cruelty under its influence costs him nearly everything, and at last, horrified at what he has become, he tears the alien costume from his body in a church bell tower, using the ringing of the great bell to drive it off. But the discarded substance falls upon Eddie Brock, who is at that very moment below, praying for Peter's destruction, and it bonds with him, and the two of them together, the alien and the bitter man, become the monstrous villain called Venom, a dark and twisted mirror of Spider-Man himself. And Venom joins forces with the Sandman to destroy Peter once and for all, seizing Mary Jane as bait for their trap. The third film ends in loss and in forgiveness both. For Harry, his memory and his true heart restored at last, comes to Peter's aid in the final battle, fighting beside his oldest friend against Venom and the Sandman, and giving his own life to save Peter, so that the two friends are reconciled only at the very moment of parting. Venom is destroyed, and Eddie Brock with him, and Peter, facing the Sandman, the man who killed his uncle, hears at last the truth, that it was an accident, that Marko never meant to fire the gun, that he has carried the guilt of it every day since, and Peter, worn down by his own long journey through anger and revenge, chooses instead to forgive him and lets him go. And so the first great trilogy ends not on triumph but on grief and grace, on the hard-won understanding that forgiveness is harder and finer than vengeance, and Peter and Mary Jane, battered but together, share a last quiet dance in the dark. A planned fourth film in that first trilogy was never made, and instead, a few years later, the whole story was begun again from the beginning, in a new pair of films, with a different actor, Andrew Garfield, in the role, and a somewhat different Peter Parker. This second version is a little cooler, a little more modern, a lonely and quick-witted boy who rides a skateboard and hides his heartache behind sarcasm, and his two films, while they end in one of the most heartbreaking places any Spider-Man has ever gone, are remembered above all for the tender and genuine love story at their center. And this version begins by reaching back before the spider bite, into a mystery about Peter's parents. For in this telling, Peter is haunted by the disappearance of his mother and father when he was only a small boy. His father, Richard Parker, was a brilliant scientist, and one night, long ago, his parents left Peter in the care of his Uncle Ben and Aunt May and vanished, never to return, dying, it is said, in a plane crash, leaving Peter with a lifetime of unanswered questions. As a teenager, Peter discovers his father's old briefcase, and the trail of clues within it leads him to the towering corporation called Oscorp, and to his father's former scientific partner, a kind but troubled one-armed researcher named Dr. Kurt Connors. And it is while secretly exploring Oscorp, slipping into a laboratory full of genetically engineered spiders, that Peter is bitten and gains his powers. At the heart of this version is Gwen Stacy, a brilliant and confident young woman, the top student in Peter's school and an intern at Oscorp, and the romance between Peter and Gwen is the beating heart of both films, awkward and sweet and real in a way that superhero romances rarely are. Gwen is no damsel. She is Peter's equal and often his rescuer, clever and brave, and she quickly learns his secret and becomes his true partner. But her father is Captain George Stacy, the head of the city's police, a man determined to hunt down the masked vigilante Spider-Man, which places Peter and Gwen's love under a constant strain, torn between her father and the boy she loves. The tragedy of Uncle Ben comes, as it always does, from Peter's own failure. For after a petty argument, Peter lets a store robber flee past him rather than lift a finger to stop him, out of spite at the shopkeeper who had just wronged him. And that same robber, moments later, shoots and kills Uncle Ben out on the street. And so this Peter too is remade by guilt and takes up the mask, building for himself as an inventor a pair of mechanical web shooters, and beginning his career as Spider-Man, at first hunting obsessively for his uncle's killer and only slowly learning the deeper lesson of responsibility to everyone, not just revenge for one. The villain of the first film grows out of Peter's own family history, for Dr. Connors, working from Richard Parker's old research, develops a serum meant to let the human body regrow lost limbs, drawing on the resilience of reptiles, and desperate and pressured, he tests it on himself, and it works, regrowing his arm, but it also transforms him, again and again, into an enormous and savage reptilian creature, the lizard. And in his altered mind, Connors comes to believe that humanity is weak, and that the world would be better if everyone were made as strong as the reptiles, and he sets out to release his serum as a gas across the whole city, to turn all of New York into creatures like himself. Peter stops him, but at a terrible cost, for Captain Stacy is fatally wounded in the battle, and with his dying breath, he makes Peter promise to stay away from Gwen, to keep her out of the danger that follows Spider-Man everywhere. And Peter, haunted, cannot keep that promise, unable to give up the girl he loves. The second of the two films is a busier and sadder one, and it moves, for all its color and spectacle, steadily toward heartbreak. Peter and Gwen's relationship remains torn by his broken promise to her dying father, the two of them drawn together and pushing apart, unable to be together and unable to stay away. A lonely and overlooked Oscorp engineer named Max Dillon, who idolizes Spider-Man after the hero once saves his life, falls, in an accident, into a tank of genetically altered electric eels, and is transformed into a being of living electricity, the glowing blue villain called Electro, his adoration curdling into a jealous rage when he feels forgotten. And Peter's long-lost childhood friend Harry Osborn returns, having inherited Oscorp upon the death of his father Norman, and carrying, in his blood, the same hereditary illness that killed his father, a disease that is slowly killing him too. Harry becomes convinced that Spider-Man's blood holds the cure to his illness, and when Peter, fearing that it might harm rather than heal him, refuses to give it, Harry's desperation turns to hatred. He frees and manipulates Electro, and then, seizing upon his father's secret research and a suit of armor, he injects himself with the very spider venom that made Peter, transforming himself into a monstrous version of the Green Goblin. And it is Harry, as the Goblin, who deals this version its deepest wound, for in a final battle high in the gears of a great clock tower, he seizes Gwen and drops her, and Peter, lunging, shoots a strand of webbing to catch her as she falls, and the web reaches her, but too late, and she strikes the ground below, and dies, in Peter's arms, the girl he loved, killed by the life he could not keep her out of. It is one of the most devastating moments in any superhero film, a faithful echo of one of the most famous tragedies in all of Spider-Man's long history, and it breaks this Peter utterly. For months afterward, he gives up being Spider-Man entirely, sunk in grief, unable to go on, until at last, remembering Gwen and all she believed about him, about hope, and about doing good even when it costs everything, he takes up the mask once more and returns to protect his city, stepping out to face a new threat, with his heart broken but his purpose renewed. This second version of Spider-Man ends there. Its planned further films never made, for the story was about to take an entirely unexpected turn, and Peter Parker was about to find himself in a much larger world. And so we come to the third live-action version, and the one most people are thinking of today, the Spider-Man, played by Tom Holland, and his story is different from the two before it, in one enormous way. For this Peter Parker does not live alone in his own world, but shares a vast, connected universe with a whole galaxy of other heroes, the great shared world of the Marvel films. This came about through an unusual agreement between the studios that held the rights, which allowed Spider-Man for the first time to stand alongside Iron Man and Captain America and Thor and all the rest, and it changed the character's story completely. For this youngest Peter grows up not as a lonely outsider, but as the eager young protege of one of the world's greatest heroes. This Peter is the youngest of the three, a boy of 15 when we meet him, and he does not get his own origin film at all, for by the time we first see him, he has already been bitten, already gained his powers, already been quietly protecting his neighborhood in a homemade costume for months. Instead, he is discovered by the billionaire inventor Tony Stark, the hero known as Iron Man, who seeks out the young web-slinger, gives him a marvelous high-technology suit, and recruits him to help in a great battle among the heroes, whisking the star-struck teenager off to fight alongside his idols before sending him home to Queens, buzzing with excitement, sworn to keep it all secret from his Aunt May, and desperate, now, to prove himself worthy of joining the Avengers. His first film in this world follows that desperate eagerness, and it is a smaller, warmer, more grounded story than its scale might suggest. A film about a 15-year-old boy who wants so badly to be a great hero that he keeps getting in his own way. Peter waits by the phone for Tony Stark to call him for the next mission, doing his homework and going to his high school and stopping small crimes in his neighborhood, all the while yearning for something bigger. His new suit is full of Stark's technology, including a friendly artificial intelligence to guide him, and he is watched over, to his frustration, by Stark's long-suffering head of security, Happy Hogan. His best friend Ned stumbles onto his secret and becomes his gleeful helper, the guy in the chair back home. He nurses a crush on an older schoolmate named Liz, and among his classmates is a sharp, strange, watchful girl called Michelle, who goes by the initials MJ. The villain of that first film is one of the finest in any of the Spider-Man movies, precisely because he is so understandable, so human. He is Adrian Toombs, an ordinary working man who runs a salvage crew, and at the very beginning, we see how he is ruined. For after one of the great battles of the wider hero films leaves the city full of dangerous alien wreckage, his company is hired to clean it up, only to be abruptly shut out by a new government and Stark operation that seizes all the lucrative work for itself. Bitter and betrayed, watching the rich and powerful heroes profit while men like him are cast aside, Toomes keeps some of the salvaged alien technology, and over the years he and his crew quietly build it into advanced weapons, which they sell on the black market, and he himself flies on great mechanical wings, becoming the villain called the Vulture. Peter stumbles onto the Vulture's operation and, hungry to prove himself, tries to stop it on his own, and it goes badly, for in trying to foil a weapons deal, he causes a passenger ferry to be split nearly in two, and only the sudden arrival of Iron Man saves the hundreds of people aboard. And here comes the heart of the film, for Tony Stark, furious and frightened, takes the high-technology suit back, telling Peter that if he is nothing without the suit, then he does not deserve it, forcing the boy to confront the difference between having gadgets and truly being a hero. Chastened, Peter returns to his ordinary life, only to make a shattering discovery. For when he goes to pick up his crush Liz for the school dance, her father opens the door, and it is Adrian Toomes, the Vulture himself, and in the car, from a few small clues, Toomes quietly works out that his daughter's date is Spider-Man. The film builds to a climax in which Peter, back in his old homemade costume, with nothing but his own courage and wits, moves to stop the Vulture from stealing a plane full of the hero's most valuable equipment, and after a desperate battle, in which Toomes' own overtaxed wingsuit begins to tear itself apart, Peter saves the life of the very man who was trying to kill him, pulling the villain from the wreckage. It is the moment Peter becomes a true hero, not because of any suit or any mentor, but because of who he is, and Toomes, in prison, remembers it, and chooses to keep the boy's secret. And afterward, Tony Stark, impressed at last, offers Peter a place among the Avengers, and, in a lovely turn, Peter turns it down, deciding that he would rather stay close to the ground, looking after his own neighborhood, a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, which is of course exactly the answer that proves he was worthy all along. Because this Peter lives in the great shared world of the heroes, his story does not stay small for long, and it is swept up, next, into the two enormous films in which all the heroes of that universe unite against a single cosmic threat, a titanic being from the stars named Thanos, who seeks to gather 6 all-powerful gems and use them to wipe out half of all life in the universe. Peter, unwilling to stay behind when the world is in danger, joins Tony Stark far out in space, wearing a magnificent new suit, and fights bravely alongside the greatest heroes, but they cannot stop the Titan, who gathers his gems and with a snap of his fingers turns half of all living things in the universe to dust. And Peter is among them. In one of the most quietly devastating moments in all these films, the young hero feels himself beginning to fade, and frightened, not understanding what is happening to him, he stumbles into Tony Stark's arms, telling his mentor that he does not feel well, that he does not want to go, and then he crumbles into ash and is gone, leaving Tony to kneel in the dust of the boy he had come to love like a son. It is a heartbreaking place to leave a hero, and it hung over audiences for a long year before the story could continue. In the second of those 2 great films, that terrible loss is undone, but at a cost. 5 years pass in the world, 5 long years of grief and emptiness, before the surviving heroes discover a way to travel through time, gather the 6 gems for themselves, and reverse the snap, bringing back everyone who was lost, so that Peter and all the others simply return to their own shock exactly as they were, having felt no time pass at all. But the Titan follows them back, and in a final, enormous battle, every hero who ever lived in that world unites against him, and it is Tony Stark, in the end, who seizes the gems for himself and snaps the Titan and all his armies out of existence, saving the universe and dying in the doing of it. And so Peter, freshly returned from the dust, is reunited with his mentor only long enough to say goodbye, kneeling beside the dying Tony Stark, and then to stand, grieving, at his funeral. The father figure who gave him his start is gone, and the loss of him shapes everything that comes next. The next film in this version follows a Peter still raw with that grief, and weighed down by a heavy expectation, for with Tony Stark gone, the world, and Peter himself, begins to wonder whether this young man is meant to be the next great hero, the next Iron Man, a burden the exhausted teenager does not feel remotely ready to carry. And so, more than anything, Peter just wants a rest, a normal summer, and he pins his hopes on a school science trip across Europe, during which he plans, at last, to tell the sharp and watchful MJ how he feels about her. But his holiday is not to be, for the spy master Nick Fury commandeers the trip, drawing Peter into a strange new crisis. A charming and heroic stranger named Quentin Beck has appeared, claiming to have come from another Earth entirely, from a parallel world in a vast multiverse of worlds, and to be pursuing monstrous creatures called the Elementals across the dimensions, great beings of water and fire that now threaten Peter's world. Beck fights these creatures with dazzling power and seems a genuine hero, a grown and confident and grieving man that the lost Peter comes to admire and to trust. And in a moment of self-doubt, feeling unworthy of Tony Stark's legacy, Peter hands over to Beck a powerful pair of glasses that his mentor left him, glasses containing an artificial intelligence with control over Stark's entire global network of weapons and drones. It is a terrible mistake, for Beck is not a hero at all, and the whole thing is an elaborate lie. He is, in truth, a bitter former employee of Tony Stark, a brilliant designer of illusions whose work was dismissed and mocked, and the monstrous elementals and Beck's own heroics are all a grand and elaborate deception, staged with an army of holographic drones, designed to make the world believe in a new hero so that Beck can seize fame and power for himself. The villain he truly is has taken the name Mysterio, the master of illusion, and now, with control of Stark's drones, he is more dangerous than ever. Peter, realizing too late how he has been fooled, must fight his way through a bewildering storm of illusions, learning to trust his own instincts, his own spider sense, over what his eyes tell him, and at last he defeats Beck in the heart of London and reclaims the stolen glasses. And there is a bright spot amid it all, for MJ, who has quietly worked out that Peter is Spider-Man, returns his feelings, and the two awkward teenagers become, sweetly, a couple. But that film ends on a shocking note that changes everything, for the defeated Mysterio, in his final moments, prepares one last trick, and after his death a doctored video is released to the world, falsely showing Spider-Man as the villain behind the London destruction, and, worse, revealing to the entire world the secret that every version of Peter Parker has always guarded most closely, his true identity, announcing to everyone that Spider-Man is a teenager named Peter Parker. And so this Peter, who wanted only a quiet summer, finds his whole life blown open, his name and face known to all the world, cast as a villain, his secret gone, and the film leaves him there, exposed and reeling, on the edge of the greatest crisis of his life. And this brings us to the film that ties all three of these separate worlds together, one of the most beloved and ambitious superhero films ever made, the one in which the three Peter Parkers from three different universes finally meet. It begins with the youngest Peter's life in ruins, his identity exposed to the whole world, his name dragged through the mud, his loved ones, his Aunt May, his girlfriend MJ, his friend Ned, all caught up in the storm of attention and suspicion that now surrounds him. The chaos even threatens their futures, and in his desperation to set things right, to give the people he loves back their ordinary lives, Peter turns to a different kind of hero altogether, a master of the mystic arts named Doctor Strange, and asks him for magical help. Peter's request is simple, that Strange cast a spell to make the entire world forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, so that his secret might be restored and his loved ones freed. Strange agrees and begins the spell, but Peter, at the last moment, keeps interrupting it, asking to make exceptions, for MJ to remember, and Ned, and his aunt, and Happy, changing the spell again and again as it is being cast, until it grows unstable and goes wrong. Strange manages to contain it, but the damage is done, for the botched spell has cracked the walls between the universes and begun to pull through, from other worlds, people who know the secret that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, people from the other two versions we have followed tonight. And so, one by one, the villains of the earlier films begin to arrive in this newest Peter's world, drawn across the void between universes. From the first trilogy come the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, and Dr. Octopus with his terrible arms, and the shifting Sandman. From the second pair of films come the reptilian lizard, Dr. Connors, and the crackling being of electricity, Electro. They are bewildered and dangerous, and they have been pulled out of their own stories at the very worst of moments. Strange means simply to capture them all and send them back where they came from, and to reset the spell and be done with it. But Peter, learning something terrible, cannot allow it. For Peter discovers that each of these villains was pulled into his world at the exact moment of their death in their own, that to send them back would be to send them back to die, and his tender heart cannot bear it. He believes, instead, that he can help them, that he can cure them, fix whatever science or accident twisted them into villains, and send them home healed and whole and alive, and give them the second chance that no one gave them before. And so, against Strange's furious objections, Peter takes the matter into his own hands, and, with his Aunt May firmly at his side encouraging his mercy, he sets out to save the very men who came to destroy him. He even succeeds, at first, repairing the machine that had enslaved Dr. Octopus to his mechanical arms, freeing the kindly scientist buried within. But this act of mercy leads to the film's great tragedy, for the Green Goblin, the madness within Norman Osborn, reasserts itself and rejects the cure and turns on Peter, and in the terrible battle that follows, the Goblin strikes down Peter's Aunt May, and she dies in his arms. And with her last breath, she gives him the words that every Spider-Man must one day learn, the words that are the very soul of the character across every version, that with great power there must also come great responsibility. It is the death that completes this Peter's origin at last, the loss of the parent figure whose love and whose lesson define him, and it leaves him shattered and alone and full of grief and rage. And it is here, in his darkest hour, that the film delivers its great and joyful surprise, for Peter's friend Ned, fumbling with one of Doctor Strange's magical rings accidentally opens a portal to another universe, and through it steps another Peter Parker, older, wearier, a Spider-Man from a different world, and then, through another portal, a third, and the three Peter Parkers stand together at last, three versions of the same hero from three separate universes, meeting for the very first time. The two older Spider-Men, drawn here by the cracks in reality, have come to help, and they gather around their grieving younger self, and they understand his pain as no one else possibly could, for each of them carries losses of his own. Each of them has failed someone. Each of them knows the particular weight of this life. The three of them together are a wonder to behold, bonding over their shared strangeness, comparing their powers and their villains and their heartbreaks. The older two offering the youngest the comfort and the wisdom of those who have walked the same hard road. And they resolve to finish what the youngest Peter began, to work together to cure all the villains and send them home whole. And they set up their strange laboratory and prepare their cures and lure the villains to a great final battle at the foot of a famous statue in the harbor. There is a deep healing in it for the older two as well, for in the course of the battle, the second Peter, the one who once failed to save the girl he loved as she fell, catches this world's MJ as she plummets from a great height, saving her and finding, in that catch, a measure of peace for his oldest and deepest wound. The battle is fierce, and the villains are cured one by one, the Sandman and the Lizard and Electro restored to the men they once were, and at the last, the youngest Peter, consumed by grief and rage over his aunt's death, nearly crosses the line into killing the Green Goblin, only to be stopped, gently, by his oldest counterpart, the first Peter, who holds him back from becoming a killer, who reminds him of who he is, and hands him the cure to give instead. And so even the Goblin is saved, and Norman Osborn is freed of his madness. But the crossing of the villains was only the beginning, for the spell is failing completely now, and the walls between all the universes are collapsing, and everyone, from every world, who ever knew that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, is beginning to break through into this one. And so Peter makes the hardest choice of his life, a choice that is the very heart of the whole film. He asks Doctor Strange to cast a final spell, not to make the world forget that he is Spider-Man, but to make the entire world forget that Peter Parker ever existed at all, to erase himself completely from the memory of everyone who ever knew him, including MJ and Ned, the two people he loves most, so that the collapsing universes will be sealed and everyone sent safely home. It is the only way, and Peter knows it, and he goes to say goodbye to MJ and Ned, and promises them that he will come and find them afterward, and explain everything, and make them remember. And then the spell is cast, and the whole world forgets him, and the two older Spider-Men return to their own universes, and Peter Parker is left utterly alone, unknown to everyone he ever loved. The film ends on a note of quiet, aching, and strangely hopeful sacrifice, for Peter does go to find MJ and Ned afterward, standing before them, ready to remind them, ready to have his life back, only to see that they are happy, that they are healing, that his return might only bring danger back into their lives, and so he chooses, at the last, not to tell them, to let them go, to protect them by remaining forgotten. He starts over completely, alone, in a small and humble apartment, and he sews for himself a new costume by hand, a simple homemade suit, and he returns to the streets as a Spider-Man that no one knows, with no famous mentor and no high technology and no fortune behind him, just a young man in a mask helping his neighbors, the purest and most classic version of the hero, a truly friendly neighborhood Spider-Man at last. And in that ending, all three of the live-action versions we have followed are quietly honored, brought together and sent home again, each a little more healed than before. We turn now to something entirely separate from the three live-action worlds we have wandered through. A different kind of Spider-Man story altogether, told not in live action but in gorgeous, painterly animation, and starring not Peter Parker at all but a different hero. These animated films exist in their own universe, or rather their own vast collection of universes, quite apart from the others, and they are widely regarded as some of the finest superhero films ever made, and their hero is a teenager named Miles Morales, a boy from Brooklyn who takes up the mask and makes it his own. Miles is a good-hearted and artistic boy, a lover of graffiti and music, the son of a stern but loving police officer father named Jefferson and a warm nurse mother named Rio, and he is close, above all, to his cool and easygoing Uncle Aaron. As his story begins, Miles is unhappy, sent away to a demanding new school where he feels out of place, missing his old life, and one night, out tagging a wall in an abandoned subway tunnel with his uncle, he is bitten by a strange glowing spider, and by the next day he has begun to change, developing the familiar powers of a Spider-Man, along with two unusual gifts all his own, the ability to turn himself invisible, and a powerful bioelectric sting he comes to call his Venom blast. Frightened and confused, Miles returns to the tunnel to understand what has happened to him, and there he stumbles into a terrible battle, for this universe already has its own Spider-Man, an experienced and beloved blonde Peter Parker who has protected the city for years, and he is fighting a monstrous crime lord named Kingpin, an enormous and grief-stricken man who has built a vast and dangerous machine, a collider, capable of tearing open the walls between parallel universes. Kingpin's purpose is a sorrowful one, for he lost his wife and his young son, who fled from him in horror after seeing the violence of his life, and dying in the accident of their flight, and now he means to use his machine to reach across the universes and find other versions of them, to replace the family he destroyed. This universe's Spider-Man, in that battle, is killed by the Kingpin, but not before he meets Miles and recognizes in the frightened boy a successor, and presses upon him the task of destroying the terrible collider. And so Miles, barely understanding his own powers, is left alone with an impossible responsibility, grieving a hero he barely knew, unsure he can be anything like the Spider-Man this city has lost. But he is not alone for long, for the Collider, when it was activated, pulled through from other universes a whole strange assortment of other spider people, other versions of the hero from other worlds, and they become Miles's unlikely teachers and companions. Chief among them is another Peter Parker, but an older, wearier, sadder one, a Spider-Man from a universe where his life has gone wrong, divorced and out of shape and full of regret, who becomes, reluctantly at first, Miles's mentor, the two of them teaching and helping each other. There is Gwen Stacy, a Spider-Woman from her own universe, cool and kind, who becomes Miles's dear friend. And there are stranger visitors still, a grim black and white Spider-Man from a shadowy world of the 1930s, a cheerful girl from an animated future with a giant spider robot, and, most delightfully, a wisecracking cartoon pig who is also, somehow, Spider-Man. Together, all of them glitching and slowly weakening in a universe that is not their own, they must help Miles destroy the Collider and find their way home. The story carries a deep personal grief for Miles, for it is revealed that his beloved Uncle Aaron has a terrible secret, that he is a masked criminal in the Kingpin's employ, and, sent to kill the new Spider-Man, Aaron discovers, too late, that the boy behind the mask is his own nephew. He cannot do it, and refuses, and for his refusal, the Kingpin kills him, and Miles holds his dying uncle in his arms, losing, as every Spider-Man must, someone he loved, and taking from that loss the resolve to become the hero he is meant to be. And in a triumphant sequence beloved by everyone who has seen it, Miles at last masters his fear and his powers, taking a literal leap of faith off a skyscraper, falling upward into the city, becoming fully and truly Spider-Man, and going on to destroy the Collider, defeat the Kingpin, and send his new friends home to their own worlds, while his father, who had never understood the boy, comes at last to be proud of the hero he has become. The animated story continues in a second film, larger and stranger and more emotionally complex, which widens the multiverse enormously and ends on a great cliffhanger. Miles, now a confident and experienced Spider-Man, still struggling to balance his secret life with the love and expectations of his parents, is reunited with his friend Gwen, who has become part of something vast, a great society of spider people gathered from across all the universes, hundreds and hundreds of them, dedicated to protecting the whole multiverse from threats, and led by a stern and driven Spider-Man from the future named Miguel O'Hara. But Miles discovers that this spider society holds a belief that horrifies him, an idea they call the canon, the notion that every Spider-Man story must contain certain fixed and terrible events, certain unavoidable losses and tragedies, and that these events cannot be prevented without tearing the very fabric of a universe apart. And Miles learns that one such event is coming for him, that his own father, about to be promoted, is fated to die, and that the Spider Society intends to let it happen, to stop Miles from saving him, for the sake of the stability of all the worlds. And Miles, being who he is, refuses utterly to accept this, refuses to let his father die for the sake of some cosmic rule, and rebels against the entire society, becoming the hunted quarry of hundreds of other spider people in a breathtaking chase across the multiverse. There is a further, painful revelation waiting for Miles, for it emerges that the very spider that gave him his powers came originally from another universe, that he was, in a sense, an accident, a boy who was never meant to be Spider-Man at all, which the society uses to argue that he does not truly belong, that he is the anomaly, the mistake, and the film ends with Miles, having fought his way free, sent by a betrayal to entirely the wrong universe, a dark version of his own world where his uncle is still alive but his father is dead, and where Miles himself, in this other life, never became Spider-Man, but grew up instead to become the very masked criminal his uncle once was. There, trapped and captured, Miles comes face to face with a darker version of himself, on a cliffhanger that has not yet been resolved, for the third and final film of this animated trilogy is still awaited, still to come, the conclusion of Miles Morales' great story yet to be told. And that unfinished quality is part of what makes the animated films feel so alive, for they are a story still in the telling, a hero still on his journey, and they capture, better perhaps than any other version, the deep and beautiful idea at the heart of the whole Spider-Man mythology, that anyone can wear the mask, that the hero is not any one particular person, but an idea that can belong to anyone, of any background, from any world, who takes up the burden of using their gifts to help others. Miles Morales is the living embodiment of that idea, a different boy from a different world, and yet unmistakably Spider-Man, proof that the story is bigger than any single Peter Parker, and can be told and retold and made new forever. There is one more corner of the Spider-Man movie universe worth touching on gently before we begin to wind down, and it is a strange and separate one, for alongside all the films about Spider-Man himself, the studio that holds his rights also made a whole series of films about his villains and his supporting characters, without Spider-Man in them at all, or only barely. These formed their own loosely connected world, an experiment in building a Spider-Man universe out of everyone except Spider-Man, and it met with mixed fortunes, but it is part of the whole sprawling tapestry, and worth a quiet mention. The most successful of these by far was a trilogy of films centered on Venom, that alien substance and its host we met earlier in the first live-action trilogy, though here reimagined completely. In these films, a down-on-his-luck investigative journalist named Eddie Brock becomes the unwilling host of the alien creature, and the two of them, the anxious man and the hungry, wisecracking monster inside him, form one of the odder and more endearing partnerships in all these films, a kind of bickering odd couple sharing one body, half horror and half comedy. Across 3 films they fight other creatures of their kind, including a terrifying red-colored version born of a serial killer, and slowly become a strange sort of hero, and the films found a real and affectionate audience even when the critics were unkind. The other films in this separate world were less fortunate, and are remembered for the most part as noble or not so noble failures. There was a film about Morbius, a brilliant scientist who, seeking to cure himself of a deadly blood disease, instead transforms himself into a kind of living vampire, torn between his hunger and his conscience. There was a film about Madame Web, a woman who gains the power to see the future, and who must protect 3 young women destined to become heroes themselves. And there was a film about Kraven the Hunter, telling the origin of the great big game hunter who, in the comics, is one of Spider-Man's most famous foes. These films struggled to win over audiences, and the whole experiment of building a universe of Spider-Man characters without Spider-Man at its center largely wound down, an interesting and ambitious road that did not, in the end, lead where its makers hoped. But there was one tantalizing thread connecting even this separate world to the others, for in a brief and playful moment, the Venom creature and its host were themselves briefly pulled across into the world of the youngest live-action Peter, caught up for a moment in the same multiversal chaos that brought the villains together, before being sent back again, leaving behind, when they vanished, only a tiny fragment of the alien substance in that other world. It was a small wink, a hint that all these separate universes might be more connected than they seem, and it is a fitting note on which to leave this strange and separate corner, a reminder that in the world of Spider-Man on film, the walls between the universes have grown thin indeed, and anyone, from anywhere, might step through at any time. Now that we have wandered through all 3 of the live-action versions, it is a gentle pleasure to lie here and consider how they differ, for each of the 3 actors and each of the 3 worlds brought something distinct to the same beloved character, and fans have happily argued the merits of each for years. The first, the earliest Peter, is often thought of as the most earnest and the most classic, a sweet and awkward and old-fashioned boy, a genuine underdog, whose films have a warmth and a sincerity, an unashamed emotional openness that many hold dearest of all. He is the Peter of the great responsibility learned the hard way, of the aching sacrifices, of the tender and long-suffering love, and there is a timeless, almost storybook quality to his 3 films. The second Peter, the one from the pair of films that came next, is cooler and more modern, a lonelier and more troubled boy who hides his pain behind quick wit and sarcasm, and his version is remembered above all for two things: for the extraordinary tenderness and chemistry of his romance with Gwen Stacy, widely felt to be the finest love story in any of the films, and for the shattering heartbreak of how that romance ends. His is the most tragic of the three versions, the one that dared to follow its hero all the way into devastating loss, and though his story was cut short before it could be completed, the depth of feeling in it has won him a devoted and protective following. The third Peter, the youngest, is in many ways the most like an actual teenager, funny and nervous and overwhelmed, a boy genuinely out of his depth, and his films are the most connected to a wider world, the most caught up in the affairs of other heroes. His is the Peter who had to learn to stand on his own after leaning on a powerful mentor, who lost, over the course of his films, both that mentor and his aunt, and who ended, remarkably, more alone than any Spider-Man before him, stripped of everything, back to the purest and most basic version of the hero. If the first Peter is the classic, and the second is the tragic, the third is perhaps the most human, the one whose growing up we watch most closely. And what the great crossover film did so beautifully was to honor all three of them at once, to let them stand together and see themselves in one another, to let the older two comfort and guide the youngest in his grief, and to give each of them a measure of the healing they had long needed. The oldest Peter, who had carried his losses the longest, got to offer his hard-won wisdom and to stop his younger self from making a terrible mistake. The second Peter, haunted forever by the girl he could not save, got to catch another falling girl and hold her safe and find some peace. And the youngest, drowning in fresh grief, got to learn that he was not alone, that others had walked this same hard road and survived it. It was a gift to the characters, and a gift to everyone who had loved them across the years, a rare and generous thing, three versions of the same hero meeting across the walls of their separate worlds and finding, in each other, exactly what they needed. There is something quietly moving in the very fact of it, in the idea that these three separate tellings of the same story, made years apart by different people with different visions, could be brought together and made to rhyme, to complete one another, to become a single larger story about the many faces of a single hero. It says something true about Spider-Man, that he can be all of these boys at once, the classic and the tragic and the human, and remain always himself. And it says something warm about stories in general, about the way the tales we love do not really compete with one another, but join together, in the end, into something larger and richer than any one of them alone. It is worth drifting, too, through the villains of all these films together, for Spider-Man has one of the finest collections of enemies in all of superhero storytelling, and there is a pattern to them that runs through every version, a pattern that says a great deal about the hero himself. For the best of Spider-Man's villains are almost never simply evil, but tragic, sympathetic, often good people, ruined by science or ambition or grief, twisted into monsters by the very same kinds of forces that made Peter a hero. Again and again they are dark mirrors of Spider-Man, scientists and dreamers who gained extraordinary powers as he did, but who let those powers corrupt them, or who were broken by loss as he was, but turned their pain outward into cruelty rather than into care. Consider how many of them are brilliant scientists undone by their own creations, like the kindly fusion researcher enslaved by his own mechanical arms, or the one-armed doctor transformed by his own serum into a reptile, or the engineer who fell into his own experiment and became a being of electricity. Consider how many are grieving or bitter men, like the crime lord who tore open the universe out of love for his lost family, or the working man who turned to crime after the powerful cast him aside, or the disgruntled employee who became a master of deadly illusions out of wounded pride. Each of them reflects some possibility within Peter himself, some road he might have taken, and part of what makes Spider-Man heroic is precisely that, facing enemies who are so like him, so shaped by the same forces, he chooses again and again the harder and better path. Towering over all of them, across the films, is the Green Goblin, the recurring arch-enemy, appearing in more than one of the versions, the villain most bound up with Spider-Man's deepest griefs. In the first trilogy, he is the father of Peter's best friend, whose death poisons that friendship into tragedy. In the second pair of films, he is that friend himself, transformed. And in the great crossover, it is the Goblin, pulled from another world, who deals the youngest Peter his most terrible loss, the death of his aunt. The Goblin, in all his forms, is Spider-Man's nemesis above all others, the one who strikes always at the heart, at the people Peter loves, and there is a reason he returns again and again, for he embodies the darkest truth of Peter's life, that being Spider-Man puts everyone he loves in danger. And there is a deep wisdom in how these films, at their best, treat even the worst of the villains, for the mercy that Spider-Man shows them is one of the truest signs of who he is. Again and again he tries not to destroy his enemies but to save them, to reach the good person buried within the monster, to cure them, to forgive them. He saves the Vulture from his own crashing machine. He frees the Fusion Doctor to redeem himself. He forgives the Sandman who killed his uncle. He sets out in the great crossover to cure every villain rather than send them to their deaths. That mercy, that refusal to give up on even the most broken and dangerous souls, is as central to Spider-Man as any power, and it sets him apart, and it is one of the most quietly beautiful things running through all these films. For the villains, in the end, are not really the point of Spider-Man's story, but a means of revealing him, a series of dark reflections held up to show us, by contrast, the light in the hero himself. They show us what Peter might have become, and each time, in refusing to become it, in choosing mercy over vengeance and responsibility over selfishness and care over cruelty, Peter shows us who he truly is. And that, perhaps, is the deepest reason his villains are so often tragic rather than simply evil, because their tragedy is the measure of his choice, and his goodness shines brightest precisely when set against the darkness of what he might have been. Spider-Man's story has never been only about the hero and his enemies, for at its heart it is a story about love, and about the people who anchor Peter to his ordinary human life. And these too are worth drifting through, for they change and echo across the versions in lovely ways. Above all, there are the women Peter loves, and each version has its own. The first Peter loves Mary Jane Watson, the red-haired girl next door he adored since childhood, and their romance is a long and aching one, full of missed chances and noble sacrifices, of a love held just out of reach by the dangers of Peter's double life. The second Peter loves Gwen Stacy, and theirs is the most tender and equal of the romances. Two clever young people who truly see each other, which makes the loss of her all the more devastating. And the third Peter loves a different Michelle, the watchful and sardonic MJ, a sweet and awkward young love that ends, heartbreakingly, when he must let her forget him entirely to keep her safe. There is a beautiful thread running through all these loves, for the women in Spider-Man's story are so often braver and stronger than the label of love interest suggests. Partners and equals rather than prizes to be won or damsels to be rescued. Gwen Stacy is a brilliant scientist who saves Peter as often as he saves her. The sardonic MJ is fearless and sharp and unshakable. Even the classic Mary Jane grows, across her films, from the object of Peter's longing into a woman who chooses, with open eyes, to share the burden of his dangerous life. And in the animated films, Gwen Stacy becomes a hero in her own right, a Spider-Woman with her own story and her own struggles, standing fully equal beside Miles. The love stories of Spider-Man are, at their best, stories of genuine partnership, and they give the films much of their warmth and their heartbreak. And around the love interests stand all the others who make up Peter's world, the family and friends who ground him. Above all, there is Aunt May, present in every version, the gentle woman who raised Peter alongside Uncle Ben, and who becomes, after Ben's death, his one remaining parent, his moral compass, the warm heart of his home. In the different films, she is imagined in different ways, older or younger, but always she is the source of Peter's goodness, the one who reminds him of who he is. And in the youngest Peter's story, it is her death and her final words about responsibility that complete his origin. She is, in a sense, the keeper of Uncle Ben's lesson, passing it on across the years. There are the friends, too, the ones who share the secret and lighten the burden, like the youngest Peter's gleeful best friend Ned, the guy in the chair who helps from home, or Miles's friends in the animated films, or the whole strange fellowship of other spider people who become, for Miles, a kind of family across the universes. And there are the father figures beyond Uncle Ben, like the mentor Tony Stark, whose love and whose loss shape the youngest Peter so deeply, or the older, wearier Peter Parker who guides Miles. For Spider-Man, though he so often feels alone, is in truth surrounded by love, held up by a whole web of people who care for him. And that web of ordinary human connection is, in the end, as important to his story as any power or any villain, the thing that keeps him human, the thing worth protecting, the reason he does it all. It is one of the quiet secrets of why Spider-Man endures, this richness of the ordinary life around him. For we do not love him only for his powers or his battles, but for his humanity. For the boy behind the mask with his aunt and his friends and his heartbreaks, his homework and his money troubles and his awkward young loves. He is the most human of heroes, the one whose ordinary life is drawn as lovingly as his heroics, and that is why his losses hurt so much, and his joys mean so much, because we know the people he is fighting for, because we have sat with him in his bedroom and his classroom and his grief, because he feels, more than almost any other hero, like one of us. Having wandered through all of them now, the 3 live-action worlds and the animated one, and the strange separate corner of the villain films, it is worth pausing on the deep and simple things that every single version shares, the unchanging heart that makes all of them, however different, unmistakably Spider-Man. For beneath all the different faces and different worlds and different details, the same essential story is always there, told again and again, like a piece of music played in different keys. And there is something deeply comforting in returning to it, in recognizing the familiar shape of it, no matter how it is dressed. There is always the spider, and the bite, and the sudden gift of powers to an ordinary young person who never asked for them. There is always the failure, the selfish moment, the small good deed left undone. There is always Uncle Ben, or a figure like him, and always his death, and always the crushing guilt that follows, and always, rising out of that guilt, the great lesson, that with great power there must also come great responsibility. It is the true origin, repeated in every version, not the powers but the responsibility, the transformation of a careless boy into a hero by the weight of a loss he blames himself for, and it is the deepest and most unchanging piece of the whole mythology. And there is always the sacrifice, the endless giving up of the hero's own happiness for the good of others. For this is perhaps the defining quality of Spider-Man across every telling, that his life is hard, that being a hero costs him, again and again, the very things he most wants. He gives up the girl to keep her safe. He gives up his ordinary life. He gives up his secret, or his mentor, or his aunt, or, in the end, his very place in the memory of everyone he loves. Spider-Man is the hero who suffers, the hero for whom doing the right thing is never easy and never free, who keeps choosing responsibility even when it breaks his heart. And that quality, that constant, costly, uncomplaining sacrifice, is a great part of why he is so beloved, for there is something genuinely noble and genuinely moving in it. And there is always the mask, and the secret, and the double life, the ordinary young person hiding an extraordinary burden, going to school or to work by day and protecting the city by night, unable to tell the people they love the truth about who they are. The mask is central to the whole idea of Spider-Man, in a way it is not for many other heroes, for it hides his face completely, and that has a meaning, for it means that anyone at all could be under there, that Spider-Man could be anyone, that the person swinging by overhead to save you might be a teenager from your own neighborhood, might be someone just like you. The mask is a promise that heroism is not reserved for the special or the chosen, but is available to anyone with the heart to take up the responsibility. That idea, that anyone can wear the mask, is perhaps the truest and most beautiful thing in the whole of Spider-Man's mythology, and it is what the many different versions, taken together, finally prove. For here is a hero who has been a shy boy and a cool outsider and an overwhelmed teenager, who has been a Peter Parker and a Miles Morales, who has been, across the comics and the films, people of every kind and every background, and who remains, through all of it, unmistakably himself. The lesson of the many Spider-Men is that the hero is not any one person but an idea, a set of values, a willingness to use whatever gifts you have to help others, and to keep doing right even when it costs you everything, and that this idea can belong to anyone, anywhere, and that is a genuinely hopeful and generous thing to believe. There is a reason, worth dwelling on gently, that Spider-Man has become perhaps the most beloved superhero in all the world, more relatable and more cherished than heroes far more powerful, and it comes down to how ordinary he is beneath the powers, how much like us. He is not a god from another world, not a billionaire with limitless resources, not a soldier or a king or a creature of destiny, but a young person from an ordinary family in an ordinary neighborhood, worrying about money and school and love, riding the subway, living in a small apartment, struggling with all the same small troubles we all know. His powers are extraordinary, but his life is not, and that gap between the wonder of what he can do and the ordinariness of who he is the very heart of his appeal. For Spider-Man is the hero who never quite has it easy, whose rent is always due, whose personal life is always a mess, who is always late and always tired and always torn between the responsibilities of his heroic life and the demands of his ordinary one. Other heroes save the world and return to glory and comfort. Spider-Man saves the world and then has to rush home to finish his homework or apologize to the person he stood up. And there is something deeply reassuring in that, for it says that heroism is not incompatible with an ordinary, struggling, imperfect life, that you do not have to be special or privileged or free of troubles to do good, that even someone whose own life is difficult can still choose every day to help others. He is also, and this matters, a hero defined by kindness rather than by strength or fear. He does not rule by intimidation, does not brood in shadow, does not frighten the city into behaving. He helps, cheerfully, humbly, stopping to reassure the frightened and to lift the fallen, cracking jokes to put people at ease, treating even his enemies with a fundamental decency. He is the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and that word, friendly, is not incidental but essential, for he is a hero you would actually want to meet. A hero who feels like he is on your side, who would help you carry your groceries as readily as he would save you from a falling building. In a genre often full of grim and frightening figures, he is a warm and hopeful one, and the world has loved him for it. And there is his humor, which is not incidental either, for Spider-Man is famous for never stopping his stream of jokes and quips, even in the middle of the most dangerous battles, and this too says something true about him. His humor is a kind of courage, a way of keeping his spirits up and putting his enemies off balance and reassuring the people he is protecting, a light he carries into the darkness. Beneath all his grief and all his sacrifice, he refuses to become bitter or grim, refuses to let the hardness of his life harden his heart, and keeps his sense of humor and his sense of hope alive through everything. And there is something genuinely admirable and genuinely comforting in that refusal, in a hero who suffers so much and still chooses, again and again, to meet the world with a joke and an open heart. Put all of it together, the ordinariness and the struggle, the kindness and the humor, the endless costly sacrifice, and the unbreakable hope, and you have a hero who feels, more than almost any other, genuinely good and genuinely near, a hero we do not merely admire from a distance, but love like a friend. That is why the world has taken him so completely to its heart, across so many films and so many versions, why each new Spider-Man is met with such eagerness, why his story can be told again and again without ever wearing out. He is the best of us, made ordinary enough to believe in, the hero who shows that anyone, even someone small and struggling and afraid, can choose to be good, and that there is a quiet heroism available to us all in simply trying, every day, to do the right thing. It is worth remembering, as we near the end, just how important these films have been, not only as stories, but as landmarks in the history of cinema itself, for Spider-Man has been at the very center of the whole age of superhero films. When the first of the live-action films arrived at the start of the 2000s, it was a genuine sensation, one of the most successful films of its time, and it helped prove, alongside a small handful of others, that superhero stories could be enormous, serious, beloved blockbusters, and in doing so, it helped open the door to the whole vast wave of superhero cinema that has dominated the movies ever since. Nearly every caped film of the last 2 decades owes something to the success of that first web-slinger, and Spider-Man has remained at the center of it all across the years, marking milestone after milestone. The great crossover film that brought the 3 live-action heroes together became one of the most successful films ever made, drawing enormous crowds back to cinemas at a time when the world dearly needed the comfort of a beloved story, a genuine cultural event that had audiences cheering and weeping in the dark. And the animated films achieved something rarer still, winning the highest honors and being hailed as not merely great superhero films, but great films full stop. Works of extraordinary artistry that pushed the whole medium of animation forward and showed everyone what the form could do. Across all of them, the different versions and the different studios and the different visions, Spider-Man has proven himself one of the most durable and adaptable characters in all of popular culture, able to be told and retold, rebooted and reimagined, animated and live, tragic and funny, again and again, without ever wearing out his welcome. Where other characters might have been exhausted by so many versions in so few years, Spider-Man only seems to grow more beloved with each new telling, each new face under the mask greeted with fresh excitement, and that endurance, that endless renewability, is a testament to the depth and the simplicity and the universality of the character at the core of it all. There is something fitting in the fact that a hero so ordinary, so human, so much like us, should have become one of the great pillars of the most spectacular kind of filmmaking there is, for it says something about what audiences truly want from their heroes. Amid all the spectacle and the special effects and the world-shaking battles, what people have returned to, again and again, is the small human heart at the center of it. The ordinary boy trying to do right. The grief and the love and the responsibility. And that is what has kept Spider-Man at the summit of it all, across so many years and so many films. The spectacle draws us in, but it is the humanity that keeps us. And Spider-Man has always had more humanity than almost any hero on the screen. And the story is far from over, for even as we lie here, more of it is on its way, and that is part of why it is such a fine moment to have caught up on all of it. The youngest live-action Peter, left at the end of his great crossover alone and forgotten, back to the purest and most basic version of the hero, has a new chapter coming, a fresh film that will pick up his story after everything he lost, and see what kind of Spider-Man he becomes now that he stands truly on his own, with no mentor and no fortune and no one who remembers him, just a young man in a homemade mask, starting over. It is a genuinely intriguing place to begin a new film, with a hero stripped back to nothing but his own heart and his own responsibility, and it will be fascinating to see where his road leads next. And the animated story too is still unfinished, still building toward its conclusion, for Miles Morales was left in the direst of circumstances, trapped in a dark parallel world, captured by a shadowed version of himself, his father's life hanging in the balance, and his story cannot end there. A final animated film is awaited to complete his great trilogy, to resolve the enormous cliffhanger, to bring Miles home and let him prove, against the whole weight of the multiverse insisting otherwise, that he can save his father and write his own story, and be the Spider-Man he chooses to be. It is one of the most anticipated conclusions in all of modern film, the promised end of one of the finest superhero stories ever told, and it is still, tantalizingly, out there ahead of us, waiting. There will be more beyond even these, of course, for a character as beloved and as durable as Spider-Man is never really finished, and there will always be another version, another film, another face under the mask, another retelling of the old and beautiful story for a new generation. The web-slinger will go on swinging between the towers of his city for as long as there are stories to tell, reinvented again and again, and each new version will be met, as they always are, with the same eager love, and will find, buried in the familiar old shape of the story, something fresh and true to say. The story of Spider-Man on film is not a finished thing but a living one, still growing, still unfolding, and there is a real pleasure in that, in knowing that there is always more to come. And so tonight is a lovely place to pause and take it all in, the whole sprawling tapestry of it. 3 live-action worlds and an animated multiverse, and a strange corner of villain films. Decades of stories and a whole crowd of heroes under the same beloved mask. All of it laid out gently in the dark for you to drift through, complete for the moment and whole. Whatever comes next, whatever new chapters arrive, the great story so far is a wonderful one, full of wonder and heartbreak and hope, and there is no better thing to carry down into sleep than the warm and familiar shape of it, the boy and the spider and the great responsibility, told and retold, and always, in the end, the same. It is a soothing thing, near the end of our long wander, simply to drift through some of the most beloved moments from all these films, the images and scenes that have lodged themselves in the memory of everyone who loves Spider-Man, like favorite photographs in an old album. There is the famous upside-down kiss in the rain from the very first film, the hero hanging inverted from a strand of web in a dark alley while the rain falls, and the girl he loves gently peeling back the lower half of his mask to kiss him, an image so lovely it has been echoed and parodied ever since. There is Uncle Ben, in every version, speaking his gentle words about power and responsibility, the quiet heart of the whole mythology. There is the beloved train sequence from the second of the first films, the hero standing at the front of a runaway train with his arms outstretched, straining with every last ounce of his strength and his will to bring it to a halt before it flies off the tracks, and then, spent and unmasked, being caught and carried gently back by the ordinary passengers he saved, who promised to keep his secret. There is the tragic scientist choosing, at the last, not to die a monster. There is, more heartbreaking, the fall of Gwen Stacy, the reaching web, the terrible instant too late, one of the saddest moments in any superhero film. There is the youngest Peter, out among the stars, feeling himself begin to fade, stumbling into his mentor's arms and telling him, frightened, that he does not want to go, a moment that broke the hearts of everyone who saw it. And there are the joyful moments too, chief among them the meeting of the 3 Spider-Men in the great crossover, 3 versions of the same hero standing together at last, marveling at one another, and, in a moment fans had dreamed of for years, all of them pointing at one another in a beloved old pose. There is the second Peter catching a falling girl and saving her, healing at last the oldest wound of his story. And from the animated films there is Miles Morales taking his great leap of faith, falling upward through the glittering city, the image inverting so that he seems to rise rather than fall, the moment he becomes fully himself, fully Spider-Man, set to soaring music, one of the most triumphant and beautiful sequences in all of modern animation. There are the quiet endings too, the various Peters sewing their own homemade costumes, returning humbly to the streets, the hero stripped back to his purest form. These moments, and 100 others, are the treasures of these films, the images that stay with us, and it is a gentle pleasure simply to let them drift by, one after another, in the warm dark, like a slideshow of old and dearly loved memories. For that is what these films have become, for so many people, a part of the furniture of their imaginations, a set of shared memories, images and moments carried since childhood, revisited and reawakened with each new film. To have grown up with Spider-Man on the screen is to carry a whole album of these moments within you, and there is something deeply comforting in that, in the familiarity of them, in knowing them so well that they feel almost like your own memories, and there are few gentler things to drift towards sleep upon than the soft and happy recollection of stories you have loved for a very long time. There are small differences between the versions that fans delight in comparing, little details that set each Spider-Man apart, and it is a pleasant, drowsy thing to drift through them. The most famous of these is the question of the webbing, of where it comes from, for the versions do not agree. The first Peter, the earliest of the live-action heroes, produces his webbing biologically from his own body, the strands emerging naturally from his wrists as part of his transformation, a gift of the spider bite itself. But the two later live-action Peters are inventors who build their webbing mechanically, designing clever devices worn at the wrist that spray a strong web fluid of their own creation, so that their web slinging is a product of their genius rather than their biology. It is a small thing, but fans have argued the merits of the two approaches for decades, the organic against the mechanical, and each has its devoted defenders. The costumes differ too, in ways that reflect each version's spirit. The first Peter wears the most classic suit, the pure and simple red and blue of the comics. The second wears a sleeker, more modern design with visible mechanical web shooters. And the youngest wears, at first, a marvel of high technology given to him by his mentor, full of gadgets and artificial intelligence, before ending, at the last, in a humble homemade suit sewn by his own hands. And even the manner of the bite varies, each Peter finding his fateful spider in a slightly different place, in a science exhibit or a corporate laboratory, though always it is a spider altered by science, and always the bite changes everything. Their powers too show small variations, for while all of them share the strength and the wall crawling and the agility, they express them differently, and their danger sense, that tingling early warning, is shown in its own way by each. The first Peter's is depicted as an almost superhuman reflex, letting him dodge blows in a slowed-down instant. The youngest calls his by an affectionate, half-joking name, treating it as a strange tingle he has learned to trust. And Miles, in the animated films, has powers all his own that no other Spider-Man shares, the ability to vanish from sight and to unleash a burst of bioelectricity, gifts that mark him as his own distinct hero even within the great family of Spider People. These little differences are part of the fun of having so many versions, for they let each telling feel fresh while remaining unmistakably the same story, and they give fans endless happy material for comparison and debate, for ranking and arguing and cherishing their favorites. And beneath all the variations, the essential things never change: the strength and the webbing and the wall crawling and the danger sense, the mask and the responsibility and the sacrifice, so that however the details shift from version to version, you always know, at once and without question, that you are looking at Spider-Man. The variations are the spice, but the heart is always the same, and there is a comfort in that too, in the way the story can be endlessly varied and yet endlessly itself. There is a gentle, wistful pleasure too in thinking about the Spider-Man films that were planned but never made, the roads not taken, the stories that might have been. For the first trilogy was meant to be a quartet, and a fourth film was well into its planning, imagined with new villains and new chapters for that beloved earliest Peter, before it was set aside, and the whole series begun again instead with a new face. We will never know quite what that fourth film would have been, what further adventures and heartbreaks it might have given that version of the hero, and there is a soft melancholy in that, in a story left forever unfinished, its ending only ever imagined. The second version, too, was meant to go further than it did, for after its two films there were grand plans, a third film, and beyond it a whole web of connected films spinning off into stories about the villains, an entire universe mapped out and eagerly awaited. But those plans were set aside as well, when the surprising deal was struck that brought Spider-Man into the great shared world of the other heroes instead. And so that second Peter's story was cut short, his planned future never filmed, leaving him, for years, a hero frozen at his moment of deepest grief. It is part of why the great crossover film meant so much, for it gave that second Peter, so long left hanging, a chance to return, and to find, at last, a measure of the healing his own films never got to give him. There is something poignant in these unmade films, these ghost stories of the franchise, the adventures that exist now only in old plans and interviews and the imaginations of fans. And yet there is something hopeful in it too, for the very fact that the story kept being restarted, kept finding new life in new hands, is a sign of how deeply the character is loved, how impossible he is to keep down. Each ending turned out not to be an ending at all, but a pause before a new beginning. Each cancelled plan making room for something new, and the character has only grown richer for all his many restarts, gathering more versions and more faces and more stories with each passing year. The roads not taken are sad to think of, but the road that was taken has been a wonderful one, and it winds on still. And in a way, those unmade films are a fitting thing to consider here at the drowsy end of our journey, for they remind us that a story like this is never truly finished, never fully told, that there are always more possibilities than can ever be filmed, more adventures than can ever be shown, an endless branching of paths the hero might walk. Spider-Man is bigger than any one film or any one version or any one plan, a story with infinite tellings, only some of which have ever been made, and there is something restful in that thought, in the sense of a story so large and so alive that it can never be exhausted, always with more of itself waiting, gently, just out of sight. There is one more thing that every version shares, drifting here near the end, and it is the city itself, for New York is the great constant home of Spider-Man, present in every film, as essential to the character as the mask or the webbing. Whether it is the youngest Peter's Queens, or Miles's Brooklyn, or the towering canyons of Manhattan through which every version of the hero swings, the city is always there, and it is always more than a backdrop, always a character in its own right, the place the hero loves and protects, the ordinary streets full of ordinary people that give his heroism its meaning. Spider-Man is not the guardian of a nation or a world, but of a neighborhood, a city, a particular place full of particular people, and that closeness to home is part of what makes him so beloved. For Spider-Man belongs to his city in a way few heroes do, moving through it not high above in some tower or far away in some fortress, but right down among its people, swinging between its buildings, perching on its streetlights, stopping to help the ordinary New Yorkers who are his neighbors and his charges, and the city loves him back in most versions, for he is theirs, a local hero, a friendly neighborhood protector, one of their own. And there are moments in these films, cherished ones, when the ordinary people of the city rally to the hero's side, shielding him, cheering him, helping him in his hour of need, the protector protected in turn by the people he has always protected. It is a lovely relationship, that between Spider-Man and his city, a bond of mutual care and belonging. And the way he moves through that city is its own kind of poetry. For of all the heroes and all their ways of getting about, there is nothing quite like Spider-Man's web swinging, that soaring, swooping, exhilarating flight through the canyons of the city, falling and catching and rising again. And the films have found endless joy in the sheer freedom and beauty of a young person swinging through the towers with the wind rushing past. It is one of the great pleasures of every Spider-Man film, that sensation of flight, and it is a gentle and happy image to hold in the mind. The figure in red and blue soaring between the glittering buildings against the evening sky, free and joyful and home. And so we come, gently, to the end of our long night's wander through every Spider-Man ever put on the screen. And perhaps it is worth resting for a last quiet moment on why this particular story, told so many times, should be so soothing to drift through at the close of a day. Part of it, surely, is the sheer comfort of the familiar, for we have followed the same essential tale again and again tonight. The boy and the spider and the great responsibility, and there is a deep and ancient pleasure in a story we know so well, in returning to its familiar shape, in recognizing the old beats no matter how they are dressed. It is the pleasure of a favorite bedtime story, told once more, its very familiarity a kind of comfort, asking nothing of us but that we let it carry us along its well-worn and beloved path. And part of it is the gentleness of the hero at its heart. For whatever face he wears, Spider-Man is a kind and hopeful figure, a hero who helps and forgives and sacrifices and keeps his heart open through every hardship. And there is something restful in spending time in the company of such goodness. In a world that can feel hard and frightening, it is a soft and reassuring thing to lie in the dark and remember a hero who is, above all, good, who catches the falling, who saves even his enemies, who carries his griefs with grace and meets the world with a joke and an open hand. He is the kind of figure it is good to fall asleep thinking about, a reminder of the best that people can be, a small warm light of decency and hope to carry down into the dark. And part of it, perhaps, is the deep and quiet reassurance folded into his whole story, the promise, repeated in every version, that ordinary people can do extraordinary good, that our struggles do not disqualify us from heroism, but are the very ground of it, that anyone at all, however small or tired or afraid, can choose to use whatever they have to help others, and that in doing so, they become something wonderful. It is a hopeful thing to believe, and a comforting one, and it is the truest gift of the whole long story, the gentle insistence, across every film and every version, that goodness is always available, always a choice, always within reach, for Peter Parker and Miles Morales, and for all of us alike. And part of it, too, is simply the pleasure of a story so complete and so whole, for we have followed the web-slinger tonight across every film ever made, from the very first to the very latest, through 3 live-action worlds and an animated multiverse, and every strange corner besides. And there is a deep satisfaction in that, in having the whole of it laid out and understood, the entire sprawling saga held gently in the mind all at once. It is the pleasure of the collector who has gathered every piece, the reader who has finished every chapter, and it is a restful and contented feeling, the feeling of a thing made whole, a long story fully told, nothing left out and nothing left hanging, the complete and beautiful shape of it there before you in the dark. And there is one last comfort, perhaps the deepest of all, in the way these stories keep insisting, across every version, that even in the hardest and darkest moments, there is always hope, always the possibility of doing good, always someone willing to swing in and help. Spider-Man is, in the end, a story about carrying on, about getting back up after every loss, about choosing goodness again and again, no matter how much it costs. and there is a quiet strength to be drawn from that, a reassurance that whatever we face, we too can carry on, can get back up, can keep choosing to be kind. It is a hopeful story at its heart, for all its heartbreak, and hope is a gentle and healing thing to hold as you drift towards sleep, the simple, stubborn belief that things can be better, that help is always possible, that goodness is always within reach. So let all of it settle over you now, softly, the whole great tapestry of it, and let it go quiet and begin to fade. Let it drift over you one last time, the boy and the spider, the great city spread out below, the figure in red and blue swinging between the towers against the evening sky, the three heroes standing together, the boy taking his leap of faith and falling upward into the light. Let the images grow dim and gentle and soft at their edges, no longer quite pictures now, but only a warm grey drift, dissolving slowly into the quiet, into the warmth, into the soft and steady rhythm of your own easy breathing. None of it is real, and none of it needs anything from you tonight. The heroes will look after their many worlds and swing between their glittering towers and save whoever needs saving, all without any help from you, and you may set the whole of it gently down and rest. There is nothing left to watch, and nothing left to follow, and nothing at all to do but let your body grow heavy, and your thoughts grow soft, and the last of the day drains slowly away into the dark. You are safe, and you are warm, and you are held, and there is nowhere you need to be but here, sinking gently down towards sleep. Let all the many heroes of the night gather softly in your mind one last time, and then let them go, one gently after another. The earliest Peter with his aching sacrifices, the second with his great love and his great grief, the youngest learning to stand on his own, and Miles taking his fearless leap into the light. Let them all drift together now, all the Spider-Men from all the worlds, and grow dim and blur and fade, until they are only a warm and happy feeling in the dark, the memory of a story loved for a very long time, softening now into sleep. Feel the weight of the blankets over you, and the softness of the pillow beneath your head, and let each slow breath carry you a little further down, past the last of the day's thoughts, down into the quiet, down into the warmth, down into rest. Rest now. You have wandered a long way tonight, through worlds and universes and decades of stories, and you have come at last to the warm and ordinary quiet of your own room, where there is nothing to fear and nothing to do but breathe and drift and rest. Let the heroes swing on through the dark without you, and let the great city sleep, and let yourself sleep too, held gently by the quiet, carried softly down toward morning. The story will keep until you wake. Sleep well and good night. There is nothing left to watch tonight, no film still running and no story left to follow, no more worlds to visit and no one at all who needs saving. You have wandered a little way into the great shared story of the web slinger, into the origin that every version holds in common, and there is a great deal more still to drift gently through before the night is over. But there is no hurry now, and nothing you need to carry, and nothing at all you must stay awake to hear. Let it all drift over you softly now, the ordinary boy and the extraordinary spider, the great city spread out below, the figure in red and blue swinging between the towers against the evening sky. Let the images grow dim and gentle and soft at their edges, the way the world does in the last moments before sleep, until they are no longer quite pictures at all, but only a warm grey drift, kind and formless and slow, dissolving gently into the quiet. None of it is real, and none of it can reach you. The heroes are only stories, the villains are only make-believe. The whole bright tangle of it is only light on a screen, and you are here, now, safe and warm and held gently by the ordinary, peaceful dark of your own room. There is nothing to fear, and nothing to solve, and nothing at all to do but let your body grow heavy, and your thoughts grow soft, and the last of the day drains slowly away. Rest now. You have earned this quiet too. The heroes can look after their many worlds tonight without any help from you, and there is nothing at all you need to do until morning, but lie still in the warm dark and breathe, and drift, and rest. Sleep well, and let the gentle dark carry you softly down toward the light of morning. Good night.